The crystal chandeliers of Le Bernardin cast prismatic rainbows across the white tablecloths, each refracted beam worth more than Maya Hassan's monthly rent. She balanced 4 plates of lobster thermidor along her left arm with the practiced grace of someone who had been serving entitled customers for 3 years, her dark eyes scanning the dining room with the analytical precision that had earned her a full scholarship to Columbia's linguistics program. Table 12 was being particularly demanding tonight. James Sterling sat with his back to the wall, a habit developed from years of hostile corporate takeovers, his steel-grey eyes fixed on his phone screen as he conducted what appeared to be the most important business call in human history. His Armani suit probably cost more than Maya's tuition for the semester, she mused, carefully setting down the plates while he gestured dismissively in her direction without looking up. "The Dubai contract needs to be finalized by tomorrow," James said into his Bluetooth earpiece, his voice carrying that particular brand of authority that came from never having heard the word no applied to himself. "I don't care what time zone they're in." Maya refilled his water glass, the ice cubes clinking softly. She'd learned to move like a ghost around tables like this. Wealthy men who treated service staff as furniture tended to tip better when they forgot you existed. James's dining companion, a silver-haired man Maya recognized as Senator Richardson from the Financial News, leaned forward conspiratorially. "The Hassan Electronics merger is moving forward then?" Maya's hand froze halfway to the wine bottle. Hassan Electronics, her Uncle Khalil's company, the one that had been struggling since the economic downturn, the one that employed half her extended family back in Detroit. "Hassan's desperate," James replied, finally setting down his phone. "Third-generation immigrant business, hemorrhaging money. They'll take whatever we offer." He reached for his wine glass, his fingers brushing Maya's wrist as she poured. These family-run companies always crumble eventually. They lack the sophisticated understanding of modern market dynamics. Senator Richardson chuckled. "You always were ruthless, Sterling." James's expression remained unchanged, but Maya caught something almost melancholy flicker across his features. "Business isn't about sentiment. Hassan's daughter apparently has some advanced degree, thinks she can modernize their operations." He took a sip of the Bordeaux. "Academic intelligence rarely translates to real-world application." Maya felt heat creep up her neck. Her cousin Layla had graduated summa cum laude from MIT with degrees in electrical engineering and business administration. She'd been working 18-hour days trying to save their family company. "هذه النادلة غبية جدا," James said suddenly in Arabic, his voice casual as he glanced in Maya's direction. "لا تفهم أننا نتحدث عن أشياء مهمة." "This waitress is too stupid. She doesn't understand we're talking about important things." The words hit Maya like a physical blow, but years of service industry experience had taught her to maintain her composure even when customers were discussing her sex life in Spanish or debating her intelligence in Mandarin. What they didn't know was that Maya Hassan spoke 7 languages fluently and understood fragments of 4 others. She straightened slowly, the wine bottle still in her hand, and looked directly at James Sterling for the first time that evening. His eyes were the color of storm clouds, she noticed absently, and there was a thin scar running along his left jawline that suggested his life hadn't always been boardrooms and 5-star restaurants. "أعتذر سيدي," Maya replied in perfect Arabic, her pronunciation carrying the slight Levantine accent she'd inherited from her grandmother. "لكن أعتقد أن هناك سوء فهم. أنا أفهم تماما ما تتحدثون عنه، وأعتقد أن تقييمك لعائلة حسان قد يكون مبنيا على معلومات ناقصة. I apologize, sir, but I think there's a misunderstanding. I understand perfectly what you're talking about, and I think your assessment of the Hassan family might be based on incomplete information." The wineglass slipped from James's fingers, sending Bordeaux cascading across the pristine white tablecloth like spilled blood. Senator Richardson's mouth fell open, a piece of lobster dangling forgotten from his fork. Maya continued, switching to English with the same fluid confidence. "Also, For future reference, discussing hostile takeovers of family businesses in front of staff isn't just rude, it's potentially actionable insider trading, depending on what information was just disclosed. The entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath. The couple at table 11 stopped mid-argument about their divorce proceedings. The sommelier paused with a bottle of champagne halfway to a cork. Even the kitchen noise seemed to dim. James Sterling stared at Maya with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. Surprise, certainly, but something else underneath. Respect, embarrassment, fear. "You speak Arabic," he said finally, his voice carefully controlled. "Among other languages," Maya replied, pulling a clean napkin from her apron to dab at the spilled wine. "I'm working on my 8th. Mandarin's proving challenging, but I think I'll have conversational fluency by spring." James seemed to be recalibrating everything he thought he knew about the past 10 minutes. "What's your background?" Maya met his eyes steadily. PhD candidate in applied linguistics at Columbia. Specialization in socio-economic language barriers and their impact on business communications. "I wrote my master's thesis on how linguistic assumptions affect international merger success rates." She paused, allowing herself a small smile. "I also happen to be Layla Hassan's cousin." The color drained from James's face. Senator Richardson cleared his throat awkwardly. "Perhaps we should discuss this another time, James." But James wasn't looking at the senator anymore. He was staring at Maya with the intensity of someone trying to solve a particularly complex equation. "Hassan Electronics. My uncle's company, yes. The one you were just describing as lacking sophisticated understanding." Maya finished cleaning the spilled wine and straightened. "Though I have to say, your Arabic pronunciation is quite good. Where did you learn?" 2 years in Beirut," James replied automatically, then seemed to catch himself. "After college, it was business-related." "Ah," Maya nodded knowingly. "Let me guess, oil industry consultation. Most Americans your age who speak Arabic with that particular accent were either military or energy sector." "Energy sector," James confirmed, his voice oddly quiet. Maya pulled out her order pad and pen, the mundane gesture somehow more pointed than any dramatic flourish could have been. "Well, gentlemen, can I interest you in dessert? Our crème brûlée is excellent, though I should warn you, the pastry chef is French, so he might judge your sophistication based on whether you know the difference between vanilla and vanille bourbon." Senator Richardson burst into unexpected laughter. "My God, Sterling, she got you good." But James wasn't laughing. He was studying Maya's face with the concentrated attention he usually reserved for market analyses and quarterly reports. "What's your name?" "Maya." She hesitated, then added, "Maya Hassan." "Hassan." He repeated her surname like he was tasting it. "And you're really working on your PhD?" "Defending my dissertation in 6 months," Maya confirmed. "Assuming I can keep paying tuition. Hence the charming career in food service." James reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card, holding it out to her. Maya glanced at it but didn't take it. "Sterling Industries," she read aloud. "Chief Executive Officer. Impressive." She looked back at his face. "Also explains the confidence in discussing my family's business affairs in public." "I'd like to apologize," James said, and Maya was surprised by how sincere he sounded. "What I said was inexcusable." "Which part?" Maya asked. "Calling me stupid, dismissing my family's intelligence, or planning to lowball desperate people?" "All of it." James set the business card on the table between them. "But especially the first part. I made assumptions based on—" He gestured vaguely at her server's uniform. "Based on the fact that I'm working as a waitress," Maya finished, "because obviously no one with a functioning brain would choose service industry work." "That's not—" James started, then stopped. "Actually, yes. That's exactly what I thought, and it was wrong." Maya studied his face, looking for signs of the corporate manipulation she'd expected. Instead, she found something that looked almost like genuine remorse. "You know, she said conversationally. In my linguistics research, I've found that people's assumptions about intelligence correlate directly with their own insecurities about their intellectual worth. She capped her pen and slipped it back into her apron. Just an observation. Senator Richardson was watching this exchange like a tennis match, his head turning back and forth between them. Would you... James cleared his throat. Would you be willing to have coffee with me? I'd like to discuss the Hassan electronics situation properly, and I owe you a real apology. Maya considered this. Every logical part of her brain was screaming that James Sterling represented everything she'd been raised to distrust. Inherited wealth, corporate callousness, the kind of privilege that came from never having to choose between textbooks and groceries. But there was something in his eyes that gave her pause, a flicker of vulnerability that seemed at odds with his polished exterior. I don't drink coffee with men who insult my intelligence in foreign languages, she said finally. James's face fell slightly. However, Maya continued, I do occasionally have tea with people who seem genuinely interested in learning from their mistakes. Tea, James repeated, as if the concept was foreign to him. It's like coffee, but more civilized, Maya said with a straight face. Very popular among sophisticated people. Senator Richardson snorted with laughter again. She's got your number, James. James looked at Maya for a long moment, then reached into his wallet and pulled out $200 bills, placing them on the table. That's for dinner and for the education. Maya glanced at the money, then back at his face. That's a very expensive linguistics lesson. Worth every penny, James said. When do you get off work? Maya checked her watch, a practical Timex that had belonged to her father. 20 minutes. There's a place called Tea Company on 82nd Street. They have an excellent selection of international teas. I know it, Maya said. They have excellent oolong. You drink oolong? James seemed surprised again. I'm full of surprises, Mr. Sterling. Maya tucked the money into her apron. $200 would cover her utilities and groceries for the next 3 weeks. But I should warn you, I don't go easy on people just because they're apologizing. I wouldn't expect you to, James replied, and Maya caught the hint of a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. As Maya walked away to finish her other tables, she could feel James's eyes following her movements. At the service station, her co-worker Jessica grabbed her arm. Girl, what was that about? Jessica whispered urgently. Table 12 looked like they'd seen a ghost. Maya glanced back toward James's table, where he was now sitting in animated conversation with Senator Richardson, his previous cold composure replaced by something more engaged, more alive. Just a small misunderstanding about linguistics, Maya said quietly. Linguistics? Jessica looked skeptical. And he gave you a $200 tip for a vocabulary lesson? Maya smiled, tucking a strand of dark hair behind her ear. Like I said, it was a very educational evening. 25 minutes later, Maya pushed through the doors of Tea Company, her server's uniform replaced by dark jeans and a Columbia University sweatshirt. She'd let her hair down from its professional bun, and without the careful service smile, her face looked younger, more open. James Sterling was already there, sitting at a small table near the window. He'd removed his suit jacket and loosened his tie, making him look less like a corporate shark and more like an actual human being. When he saw her, he stood, a gesture of courtesy that surprised her. Thank you for coming, he said, pulling out her chair. Thank you for not running away after I called you out, Maya replied, settling into her seat. Most people with fragile egos would have doubled down on the insults. I don't have a fragile ego, James said automatically, then caught himself. Actually, that's probably exactly what someone with a fragile ego would say. Maya laughed, a genuine sound that transformed her entire face. Self-awareness is a good start. They ordered tea, oolong for Maya, Earl Grey for James, and sat in the kind of awkward silence that follows life-altering conversations. So, James said finally, linguistics PhD, that's not exactly a common career path. Neither is billionaire tech mogul, Maya pointed out, though I imagine yours comes with better health insurance. James smiled ruefully. Fair point. He paused, studying her face in the soft light from the window. "Can I ask what drew you to languages?" Maya considered the question, wrapping her hands around her teacup. "My grandmother," she said finally. "She came here from Lebanon in 1952, married my grandfather, raised 4 kids. But she never really learned English properly, not because she couldn't, but because she was afraid of losing herself in translation." James leaned forward slightly, genuinely interested. "She used to tell me stories in Arabic, then in her broken English, then back to Arabic when the English couldn't capture what she meant." Maya smiled at the memory. "I realized that language isn't just communication. It's identity, culture, power. The ability to understand someone in their own language is the ability to see the world through their eyes." "And your family business?" James asked carefully. Maya's expression grew more serious. "My uncle Khalil started Hassan Electronics in 1985 with $1,200 and a dream of building technology that connected people across cultures. He developed some of the early multilingual interfaces for international telecommunications." She met James's eyes. "The company you're planning to acquire built the software that probably powers half the international calls in the Midwest." James absorbed this information silently. "But you already knew that," Maya continued. "Your research team would have provided comprehensive background on Hassan Electronics' innovations and market position." "Yes," James admitted, "though they didn't mention the families, educational backgrounds." "Because you didn't ask," Maya said simply. "You saw immigrant family business and made assumptions about sophistication and capability." James set down his teacup with careful precision. "You're right, and I'm sorry." They sat in contemplative silence for several minutes, the ambient noise of the tea shop filling the space between them, the hiss of the espresso machine, the gentle murmur of other conversations, the rustle of newspaper pages. "Can I ask you something?" Maya said finally. "Of course." "Why Arabic? 2 years in Beirut is a significant commitment for someone in the energy sector." James's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "My father's company had contracts throughout the Middle East. He wanted me to understand the region, the language, the culture." He paused, choosing his words carefully. He believed that business was ultimately about human connection. "Believed?" Maya caught the past tense. "He died when I was 28, James said quietly. "Car accident." "I'm sorry," Maya said, and meant it. "He would have liked you," James said suddenly, then looked surprised that he'd spoken the thought aloud. Maya tilted her head, studying his face. "Why?" "He always said the smartest people in any room were usually the ones no one was paying attention to." James met her eyes. He would have been fascinated by someone who spoke 7 languages and chose to work in service industry while completing a PhD. "Chose is a strong word," Maya said dryly. "More like forced by economic circumstances. But you could have taken student loans, gotten research positions, teaching assistantships." Maya laughed, but there was no humor in it. Spoken like someone who's never had to calculate whether buying groceries means skipping the electric bill. She leaned back in her chair. "I do have a research position, and I do teach undergrads, but Columbia tuition is $60,000 a year, and stipends don't cover living expenses in Manhattan." James looked genuinely shocked. 60,000? Plus living expenses, books, research materials? Maya shrugged. "The restaurant job isn't glamorous, but it pays the bills and gives me flexible hours for my academic work." "And your family can't help?" Maya's expression hardened slightly. "My family is busy trying to keep their business from being bought out by corporate sharks who think they're too unsophisticated to understand modern market dynamics." James had the grace to look ashamed. "Point taken." Maya's phone buzzed, and she glanced at the screen. A text from her cousin Layla. "Emergency family meeting tomorrow. Uncle Kay thinks we might have to accept Sterling's offer." Maya stared at the message for a long moment, then looked up at James, who was watching her with concern. "Everything all right?" he asked. Maya considered lying. then decided honesty might be more interesting. That was my cousin Layla. Apparently there's a family meeting tomorrow about your company's offer. James went very still. Maya, don't, she said, holding up her hand. Don't apologize again, and don't try to explain business necessity. Just tell me something. What? Maya leaned forward, her dark eyes intense. If you met my Uncle Khalil, if you saw what he's built, if you understood the innovation and the heart behind Hassan Electronics, would it change anything? James stared at her for a long moment, and Maya could almost see the war playing out behind his eyes. Corporate logic versus something more human, more complicated. I don't know, he said finally, and Maya appreciated his honesty more than empty reassurances. Well, Maya said, standing and gathering her purse, I guess we'll find out. Wait, James said, also rising. This doesn't have to end here. Maya paused at the door, looking back at him. Doesn't it? Tomorrow you'll make an offer that will probably destroy my family's legacy. Tonight was just, what? An interesting anthropological experience for you? No, James said firmly, stepping closer. Tonight was, I don't know what tonight was, but it wasn't that. Maya studied his face, looking for deception, manipulation, the calculated charm she'd expected from someone in his position. Instead, she found confusion, genuine conflict, and something that looked almost like longing. I have to go, she said finally. Can I see you again? James asked. Maya considered this, her hand on the door handle. Ask me after the Hassan Electronics meeting. Maya? James's voice was soft, almost pleading. She turned back one more time, and James was struck by how beautiful she looked in the streetlight filtering through the window. Intelligent, complicated, real in a way that made every other woman he'd ever known seem like a pale imitation. For what it's worth, Maya said quietly, I think your father would be disappointed in the man you've become. The words hit James like a physical blow, but before he could respond, Maya was gone, disappearing into the Manhattan night and leaving him alone with his Earl Grey and the uncomfortable realization that everything he thought he knew about his life had just shifted on its axis. James Sterling hadn't slept, Erling. He stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse office, watching the sun rise over Manhattan like a corporate deity surveying his kingdom. The city spread out beneath him in all its chaotic glory, millions of people starting their day, making decisions, changing lives. From 40 floors up, they looked like ants, following predetermined paths. I think your father would be disappointed in the man you've become. Maya's words had been echoing in his head for 8 hours now, bouncing around his skull like a pinball, hitting every nerve ending along the way. He'd tried drowning them out with quarterly reports, international market analyses, 3 different workout routines, and half a bottle of scotch that had done nothing but give him a headache to match his insomnia. Sir? His assistant Marcus appeared in the doorway, impeccably dressed despite the early hour. Marcus had been with James for 5 years and had developed an uncanny ability to read his moods from across the room. The Hassan Electronics presentation is ready for the 10 o'clock board meeting. James didn't turn from the window. Tell me about Khalil Hassan. Marcus consulted his tablet. 62 years old, immigrated from Lebanon in 1979, founded Hassan Electronics in 1985. Started with telecommunications software, expanded into multilingual interface design. 3 children, 2 grandchildren. Wife died of cancer in 2018. That's not what I asked, James said quietly. Tell me about him as a person. Marcus looked confused. Sir? James finally turned, and Marcus was startled by the exhaustion in his boss's eyes. In 5 years, he'd never seen James Sterling look uncertain about anything. What kind of man is he? What drives him? What does he care about? James moved to his desk, fingering the Hassan Electronics files spread across the mahogany surface. Why did he start this company? Marcus hesitated. I could have research pulled together a more detailed personal profile. No. James sank into his chair, suddenly feeling every one of his 35 years. Cancel the 10 o'clock meeting. Sir? Marcus's voice pitched higher with alarm. The board expects your recommendation on the Hassan acquisition. The due diligence deadline is... I know what the deadline is, James interrupted, and I know what the board expects. But I need to understand something first. Marcus set down his tablet carefully. In 5 years of working for James Sterling, he'd never heard his boss use the word understand in relation to an acquisition. James Sterling analyzed, calculated, strategized, and executed. Understanding was for philosophers and therapists. Should I reschedule the Hassan meeting for this afternoon? James considered this, his fingers drumming against the desk. No, schedule it for tomorrow. And Marcus? Yes, sir. Find out everything you can about Maya Hassan, PhD candidate at Columbia, linguistics program. But I want personal information, not just academic records. Marcus made a note on his tablet, trying not to show his surprise. James Sterling had never asked for personal information about anyone who wasn't a direct business threat or potential board member. Anything specific you're looking for? James stared out at the city again, his expression unreadable. I want to understand what kind of person chooses to work as a waitress while completing a doctorate at an Ivy League school. After Marcus left, James pulled up the Hassan electronics file on his computer. But instead of reviewing financial projections, he found himself staring at a family photo from the company's website. Khalil Hassan stood in the center, his arm around a young woman who looked remarkably like Maya. The same dark eyes, the same intelligent expression. The rest of the family surrounded them, and something in their faces reminded James uncomfortably of his own family photos from before his father died, before Sterling Industries became his entire world. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Thank you for last night. Despite everything, it was educational. Maya James stared at the message for several minutes before typing back. The education was mutual. Are you free for lunch? The response came back immediately. I'm at a family meeting about your hostile takeover. Rain check? James set down his phone and rubbed his temples. Somewhere across the city, Maya Hassan was sitting in a room with her family, discussing how to survive James Sterling's corporate ambitions. The irony wasn't lost on him. Maya sat at her uncle's dining room table, surrounded by 3 generations of Hassan family members and feeling like she was watching her childhood die in real time. Uncle Khalil sat at the head of the table, his usually vibrant presence diminished by weeks of sleepless nights and impossible decisions. At 62, he still had the same sharp eyes that had guided Hassan Electronics through 3 decades of technological evolution. But today, those eyes looked tired. The Sterling offer is final, he said quietly, his slight Lebanese accent more pronounced when he was stressed. 12.5 million for complete acquisition. They want an answer by Friday. Maya's cousin Layla, brilliant, fierce Layla with her MIT degrees and 18-hour workdays, looked like she wanted to put her fist through the wall. It's insulting, Uncle Kay. Our intellectual property alone is worth more than their entire offer. Intellectual property doesn't pay the bills, Habibti, Khalil replied sadly. And we have bills. Maya's Aunt Fatima, Khalil's sister-in-law, spoke up from her corner of the table. What about taking out loans, refinancing? We've already leveraged everything, Layla said, spreading financial documents across the table like battle plans. The economic downturn hit our major contracts hard. Telecommunications companies are cutting costs, not investing in new multilingual interfaces. Maya's younger cousin Omar, fresh out of college and full of Silicon Valley dreams, leaned forward eagerly. What if we pivoted? Mobile apps, social media integration, AI-powered translation services. With what capital? Layla shot back. Omar, we're barely making payroll. Pivoting requires investment we don't have. So we just give up? Omar's voice cracked with frustration. 30 years of building something important, and we hand it over to some corporate shark who probably can't even pronounce our name correctly. Maya winced, remembering James's perfect pronunciation of her Arabic surname the night before. Khalil raised his hand for silence. This isn't giving up. This is surviving. Sterling Industries has the resources to expand Hassan Electronics' reach, to develop the technology we've only dreamed of building, and fire half our employees in the name of efficiency, Layla added bitterly. We don't know that, Khalil said, but his voice lacked conviction. Maya had been quiet throughout the discussion, but now she spoke up. Actually, we might be able to find out. Everyone turned to look at her. What do you mean? Layla asked. Maya hesitated, then decided honesty was the only way forward. I met James Sterling last night. The room erupted. You what? Layla's voice was sharp with disbelief. How? Omar demanded. Where? Aunt Fatima added. Khalil raised his hand again, and the family fell silent. Tell us what happened, Maya. Maya took a deep breath and recounted the previous evening. The restaurant encounter, the Arabic conversation, the tea-shop discussion. She left out her growing confusion about James Sterling's character and the strange vulnerability she'd glimpsed beneath his corporate armor. When she finished, the room was silent for a long moment. He insulted our intelligence in Arabic, Layla said finally, her voice dangerously quiet, in front of a United States senator, and then apologized, Maya added. Genuinely, I think. You think? Omar's voice was incredulous. Maya, this man is trying to destroy our family's legacy. Is he? Maya asked quietly. Or is he trying to save a failing company the only way he knows how? The room erupted again, but Khalil's voice cut through the chaos. Enough. He looked directly at Maya. What was your impression of him? As a person? Maya considered her words carefully. Arrogant. Privileged. Probably hasn't heard the word no very often. She paused. But also conflicted, intelligent, and carrying some kind of grief. Grief? Layla scoffed. What does a billionaire have to grieve about? His father died 7 years ago, Maya said quietly. He mentioned that his father believed business was ultimately about human connection. Khalil's expression shifted subtly. And what do you think James Sterling believes? Maya met her uncle's eyes. I think he's forgotten what his father taught him. But I don't think it's gone entirely. The family exchanged glances, having one of those wordless conversations that came from decades of shared history and mutual trust. Maya, Khalil said finally, would you be willing to meet with Mr. Sterling again? Uncle Kay, Layla started to protest. Not as a negotiator, Khalil clarified, but as a cultural ambassador, someone who can help him understand what Hassan Electronics really represents. Maya felt her stomach drop. I don't think that's a good idea. Why not? Omar asked. You've already established a rapport. Because... Maya struggled for words that wouldn't reveal how James Sterling's storm-grey eyes had kept her awake half the night, or how his smile had made her forget for a moment that he represented everything her family was fighting against. Because I'm not objective anymore. Layla's expression sharpened with understanding. Maya, please tell me you're not developing feelings for the man trying to buy out our family. I'm not developing feelings, Maya said quickly. I'm just... It's complicated. It's not complicated, Omar said firmly. He's the enemy. Is he? Khalil asked quietly. Or is he a man making decisions based on incomplete information? All eyes turned to the family patriarch. Maya, Khalil continued, you said he speaks Arabic, that he spent 2 years in Beirut, that his father believed in human connection. Yes, but that tells me James Sterling once understood our culture, our values. Perhaps he's simply lost sight of them. Khalil leaned forward, his eyes intense. If there's a chance, any chance, that we can help him remember, shouldn't we try? It's too risky, Layla said. What if he's manipulating Maya, using her feelings to gain insider information? Maya's cheeks burned. What feelings? I barely know the man. You know him well enough to recognize grief, Aunt Fatima observed gently, and well enough to see past his arrogance to whatever vulnerability lies beneath. Maya opened her mouth to protest, then closed it again. Khalil reached across the table and took her hand. Habibti, I would never ask you to compromise yourself for our business. But if you're willing, if you think there's any possibility of reaching the man his father raised, then perhaps— Perhaps what? Maya asked, though she was afraid she already knew. Perhaps you could invite Mr. Sterling to dinner, Khalil said simply. Here, with the family, let him see what he's really trying to acquire. Maya stared at her uncle in horror. You want me to bring James Sterling to family dinner? I want him to understand that Hassan Electronics isn't just a company, Khalil replied. It's a family, it's a community. It's 30 years of immigrants building something meaningful in a country that didn't always welcome them. And if he doesn't care? Maya asked. If seeing our family just makes him more determined to acquire us at a discount? Khalil shrugged with the fatalism of a man who'd survived war, immigration, and 3 decades of American business. Then we'll know we tried everything. Maya looked around the table at the faces she'd loved her entire life. Her brilliant cousin Layla, with her MIT degrees and fierce loyalty, young Omar with his Silicon Valley dreams and unshakable optimism, Aunt Fatima with her gentle wisdom and unending faith in family, and Uncle Khalil with his tired eyes and unbroken dignity. This is insane, she said finally. Probably, Khalil agreed. Will you do it? Maya closed her eyes, thinking of James Sterling's storm-grey gaze, his careful pronunciation of her name, the vulnerability he'd shown when talking about his father. I'll ask him, she said finally, but I'm not making any promises about the outcome. Layla reached across the table and squeezed her hand. Just be careful, okay? Don't let him charm you into forgetting what's at stake. Maya squeezed back. I won't. But even as she said the words, she wondered if she was lying. James was reviewing architectural plans for a new data center in Singapore when his phone buzzed with another text from Maya. My family would like to invite you to dinner. Tomorrow night, 7 p.m. Are you available? He stared at the message, his heart rate inexplicably accelerating. A family dinner invitation was either a gesture of unprecedented trust or an elaborate trap. Given the circumstances, probably both. His fingers hovered over the keyboard for several minutes before he typed back, I'd be honored. Should I bring anything? Just an open mind. James smiled despite himself, then immediately felt guilty about smiling. Tomorrow night, he would sit at Khalil Hassan's dinner table and break bread with the family whose company he was planning to acquire. It should feel like a business dinner, a strategic reconnaissance mission. Instead, it felt like the most important invitation he'd received in years. Marcus appeared in his doorway again, looking harried. Sir, the board is asking about the Hassan recommendation. They're expecting— Tell the board the Hassan acquisition requires further analysis, James interrupted. We'll present our final recommendation next week. Marcus blinked. Next week, sir, the competition is— The competition can wait, James said firmly. Some decisions require more than financial projections. After Marcus left, shaking his head in confusion, James returned to the window. Somewhere out there, Maya Hassan was probably regretting her text message and wondering what kind of chaos she'd just invited into her family's life. He thought about calling her, explaining that dinner might not be the best idea given the circumstances, suggesting they wait until after the acquisition details were finalized. Instead, he found himself looking up directions to the nearest Lebanese bakery. If he was going to have dinner with the Hassan family, he was damn well going to bring appropriate dessert. His father would have approved. Maya stood in her uncle's kitchen, stress cooking with the intensity of someone preparing for either a dinner party or a wake. The kibbeh smells perfect, Aunt Fatima said, appearing beside her with a reassuring presence. Stop worrying. I'm not worrying, Maya lied, stirring the yogurt sauce for the 3rd time in 5 minutes. I'm just processing. Processing what? Maya set down her spoon and turned to face her aunt. What if this backfires? What if bringing him here just makes everything worse? Aunt Fatima studied her niece's face with the careful attention of someone who'd raised 5 children and recognized lovesickness when she saw it. Or what if it makes everything better? I'm not sure there's a better outcome available, Maya said quietly. Either he buys the company or he doesn't. Either way, everything changes. Everything was already changing, Habibti, Aunt Fatima replied gently. At least now we have a chance to influence how. The doorbell rang, and Maya's heart jumped into her throat. That's him, she said unnecessarily. Then answer the door, Aunt Fatima said practically, unless you're planning to make him wait on the porch until the food gets cold. Maya wiped her hands on her apron, checked her reflection in the hallway mirror, and opened the front door. James Sterling stood on her uncle's modest front porch, looking entirely out of place in his expensive suit, holding a white box from Nuri Brothers Bakery and wearing an expression of barely controlled anxiety. "Hi," he said simply. "Hi," Maya replied, suddenly aware that she was still wearing her apron and probably smelled like garlic and lamb. They stood there for a moment, neither moving, as if crossing the threshold would make this entire situation real and irreversible. "Are those baklava?" Maya asked, nodding at the box. "Assorted pastries," James replied. "I wasn't sure what would be appropriate." "Baklava is always appropriate," Maya said, stepping aside to let him in. "Fair warning, my family's not exactly subtle. They're going to ask you a lot of questions." James paused in the entryway, taking in the family photos covering every available wall surface, the comfortable mismatched furniture, the warm lighting that made everything feel lived in and loved. "This is beautiful," he said, and sounded like he meant it. "It's home," Maya replied, then immediately felt self-conscious about the simplicity of her words compared to what was probably waiting for him in his Manhattan penthouse. "Maya," Uncle Khalil's voice boomed from the living room, "bring our guest in here." Maya led James into the living room, where her entire family was arranged in what was clearly a carefully orchestrated, welcoming committee. Uncle Khalil rose from his favorite chair, extending his hand with genuine warmth. "Mr. Sterling," he said in accented but perfect English, "welcome to our home." James shook his hand, and Maya watched his expression carefully. She saw surprise, probably at Khalil's dignity and presence, followed by what looked like genuine respect. "Thank you for having me, Mr. Hassan. Your home is lovely. Please, call me Khalil." He gestured toward the rest of the family. "My daughter Layla, my nephew Omar, my sister-in-law Fatima, and of course, you've met Maya." James nodded politely to each family member, his corporate training evident in his smooth social interactions. But Maya caught him glancing around the room, taking in details. The engineering textbooks scattered across the coffee table, the family business awards displayed on the mantelpiece, the children's drawings taped to the refrigerator in the open kitchen. "Can I offer you something to drink?" Fatima asked. "Coffee? Tea? We have excellent Arabic coffee." "Arabic coffee sounds perfect," James replied, and Maya noticed he pronounced it correctly. Kahwa, not the Americanized version most people used. As Fatima bustled into the kitchen, Omar leaned forward eagerly. "So you actually lived in Beirut for 2 years?" James settled into the offered chair, seeming to relax slightly. "Yes, from 2006 to 2008. I was working on energy infrastructure projects throughout the region." "What was it like?" Maya asked, genuinely curious despite herself. James considered the question. "Complicated, beautiful, heartbreaking." He paused, his expression growing distant. "The people I met there taught me more about resilience and innovation than any business school ever could." Khalil nodded approvingly. "Lebanon has always been a nation of survivors and entrepreneurs." "Your Arabic is quite good," Layla observed, her tone neutral but her eyes watchful. "I had excellent teachers," James replied, "though I'm sure I'm rusty after all these years." Fatima returned with a tray of small glasses filled with thick, cardamom-scented coffee. James accepted his gratefully, inhaling the familiar aroma. "This brings back memories," he said quietly. "Good ones, I hope," Khalil said. "Mostly." James took a sip, closing his eyes briefly. I haven't had proper Arabic coffee in years. Maya watched him carefully, noting the way his shoulders relaxed, the way his corporate mask seemed to slip just slightly in the warmth of her family's hospitality. So, Omar said, apparently unable to contain his curiosity any longer, what made you decide to go into the acquisition business? Omar, Layla warned quietly. What? I'm just asking. James didn't seem offended. It's a fair question. I inherited Sterling Industries from my father. He built it from nothing, focused primarily on energy and telecommunications infrastructure. After he died, James paused, choosing his words carefully. I shifted focus toward acquisitions and mergers. It seemed like the most efficient way to grow. Efficient, Khalil repeated thoughtfully, but not necessarily the most meaningful. James met the older man's eyes. No, not necessarily. An uncomfortable silence settled over the room, broken by Fatima's call from the kitchen. Dinner is ready. Udi, the Hassan family moved toward the dining room with the practiced choreography of people who'd shared thousands of meals together. James followed, and Maya saw him pause in the doorway, taking in the scene. The table laden with Lebanese dishes, the family settling into clearly established seats, the easy intimacy of people who belong together. Mr. Sterling, please sit here, Khalil said, indicating the chair to his right. Place of honor. James looked genuinely touched. Thank you. As they passed dishes and filled plates, the conversation flowed more easily. Omar peppered James with questions about the tech industry. Fatima shared stories about her own immigration experience, and Layla gradually warmed up enough to discuss the technical challenges facing telecommunications companies. Maya found herself watching James more than participating in the conversation. She noticed how he listened, really listened when people spoke, how he asked follow-up questions that showed genuine interest, how his entire demeanor was different from the cold corporate executive she'd met at the restaurant. Maya tells us you knew about Hassan Electronics before considering acquisition, Khalil said during a lull in the conversation. James set down his fork, suddenly looking uncomfortable again. I did. Your company's multilingual interface technology is quite impressive. But not impressive enough to merit a fair offer? Layla asked pointedly. Layla, Maya warned. It's all right, James said quietly. She has every right to ask. He turned to address Layla directly. You're right. The offer we prepared was based on your company's current financial situation, not its potential value. And now? Khalil asked. James was quiet for a long moment, his gaze moving around the table, taking in each face. Now, I'm beginning to understand what my evaluation missed. Which is? Maya asked softly. Maya. James met her eyes across the table, and she saw something vulnerable and conflicted in his expression. The human element, the innovation that comes from passion rather than profit margins. The kind of legacy that can't be quantified in quarterly reports. The table fell silent again, but this time it felt charged rather than uncomfortable. Mr. Sterling, Khalil said finally, may I ask you something personal? Of course. What would your father think of the man you've become? Maya's breath caught. It was almost exactly what she'd said to James at the tea shop, but coming from her uncle it carried different weight, the authority of one patriarch addressing another. James was quiet for so long that Maya thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. I think he'd be disappointed that I've forgotten why he started Sterling Industries in the first place. And why was that? Fatima asked gently. To build bridges, James said, his eyes distant with memory. He used to say that technology was only valuable if it connected people, if it brought understanding across cultural and linguistic barriers. He looked directly at Khalil. Your company embodies everything he believed in, and I was prepared to dismantle it for profit. The weight of his admission settled over the table like a physical presence. Omar broke the silence first. So what happens now? James shook his head slowly. I don't know. I have a board meeting on Friday. They're expecting me to recommend the acquisition. And will you? Layla asked. I honestly don't know, James replied. What I do know is that I can't make this decision the way I've made every other decision for the past 7 years. How have you been making decisions? Maya asked quietly. James met her eyes again, and she saw pain there along with the conflict. Like my father never existed. Like profit was the only thing that mattered. He paused. Like I'd forgotten that business is ultimately about human connection. Maya felt her heart constrict with something that might have been hope or might have been heartbreak. She wasn't sure there was a difference anymore. Well, Khalil said finally, rising from his chair, whatever you decide, we're grateful you came tonight. It takes courage to sit at your competitor's dinner table. Thank you for having me, James replied, also standing. This has been enlightening. As the family began clearing dishes, Maya found herself alone with James in the living room. Thank you, he said quietly. For what? For giving me the chance to remember who I used to be. James paused, studying her face. Who I might still be able to become. Maya felt tears threatening and blinked them back. James. I should go, he said quickly, as if sensing the dangerous territory they were approaching. Thank you again for dinner. Please give my compliments to your aunt. Everything was incredible. Maya walked him to the door, acutely aware of the domestic intimacy of the gesture, as if she were seeing off a boyfriend rather than a corporate adversary. Maya, James said, pausing on the threshold, whatever happens with the business, I want you to know that meeting you has changed something for me. Changed what? She asked, her voice barely audible. James reached out as if to touch her face, then caught himself and dropped his hand. Everything, he said simply, and then he was gone, leaving Maya standing in her uncle's doorway, watching his taillights disappear into the night and wondering if she'd just saved her family's company or doomed them all. Friday morning arrived with the kind of crystalline clarity that made Manhattan look like a postcard and bad decisions feel inevitable. James Sterling stood in his corner office, watching the city wake up below him while his coffee grew cold on the mahogany desk behind him. In 2 hours, he would walk into the Sterling Industries boardroom and either validate 7 years of ruthless corporate strategy or blow up his entire professional reputation. The Hassan Electronics acquisition file lay open on his desk. Financial projections and market analyses spread across the surface like tarot cards, predicting a foregone conclusion. $12.5 million for a company whose intellectual property alone was worth 3 times that amount. It was, by any objective measure, an excellent deal for Sterling Industries. It was also, James now realized, legalized theft. His phone buzzed with a text from Maya. Good luck today. Whatever you decide, I understand. James stared at the message, his thumb hovering over the keyboard. How could she understand when he didn't understand himself? 3 days ago, acquiring Hassan Electronics had been a simple business decision. Now it felt like choosing between his father's legacy and his own survival. A soft knock interrupted his brooding. Marcus entered, looking more nervous than James had ever seen him. The board members are assembling, sir. They're eager to hear your recommendation. I'm sure they are, James replied without turning from the window. Marcus hesitated in the doorway. Sir, if I may, the research on Maya Hassan that you requested. James finally turned. What did you find? Marcus consulted his tablet, looking uncomfortable. She's remarkable, sir. Full scholarship to Columbia, teaches 3 undergraduate courses while completing her PhD, published 2 papers on socio-economic linguistic barriers in international business. Her professors describe her as brilliant and financially struggling, Marcus said quietly. Student loan debt, family medical bills from her grandmother's cancer treatment last year, working 30 hours a week at the restaurant just to make ends meet. James absorbed this information, feeling something twist in his chest. Anything else? She volunteers at a literacy center in Queens, teaching English to recent immigrants. Has been doing so for 3 years, completely pro bono. Marcus paused. Sir, everyone I spoke with described her as having exceptional integrity. Thank you, Marcus. That will be all. After Marcus left, James returned to staring out the window. Maya Hassan was working herself to exhaustion, trying to build a better world, while he sat in his ivory tower deciding which companies to cannibalize for profit. The contrast wasn't lost on him. His desk phone rang. The caller ID showed his mother's number. Hello, Mother. James, darling. Catherine Sterling's voice carried the refined authority of old money and older expectations. I trust you're prepared for today's board meeting. I'm prepared, James said carefully. Good. The Hassan acquisition is exactly the kind of strategic thinking your father would have admired. Efficient, profitable, forward-looking. James closed his eyes. Would he have admired it? Of course. Your father was a businessman first, James. He understood that sentiment has no place in corporate strategy. I remember him differently, James said quietly. Catherine's voice sharpened slightly. Your father built Sterling Industries from nothing by making hard decisions. Don't let misplaced nostalgia cloud your judgment. After hanging up, James sat in his chair and pulled out a photograph he kept in his desk drawer. His father, at the groundbreaking ceremony for Sterling Industries' first international telecommunications project. David Sterling was shaking hands with a Lebanese engineer, both men grinning broadly. On the back, in his father's handwriting, building bridges, one connection at a time. James had forgotten about that photograph, had forgotten about a lot of things, apparently. The intercom buzzed. Mr. Sterling, the board is ready for you. James slipped the photograph into his jacket pocket. I'll be right there. The Sterling Industries boardroom was designed to intimidate. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Manhattan. A 30-foot conference table dominated the space, and portraits of previous company leaders stared down with expressions of corporate judgment. James had chosen this room specifically to remind board members of Sterling Industries' legacy of success. Today, it felt like a mausoleum. The board members were arranged around the table like a tribunal, 12 of the most powerful people in American business, collectively worth more than several small nations. They looked at James with the expectant confidence of sharks scenting blood in the water. Gentlemen, ladies, James began, taking his place at the head of the table, thank you for gathering on short notice. Let's get to it, Sterling, interrupted Richard Blackwood, chairman of the board and James's father's former business partner. We've been waiting 3 days for your recommendation on Hassan Electronics. The due diligence period expires at 5 p.m. today. I'm aware of the timeline, Richard. Then let's hear it, said Margaret Chen, the board's youngest member and arguably its most ruthless. The preliminary financials suggest Hassan Electronics is ripe for acquisition. What's our strategy? James opened the file in front of him, but instead of reading from it, he found himself looking at the faces around the table. These people had known his father, had worked with David Sterling to build something meaningful. When had they all forgotten what that something was? Hassan Electronics, James began slowly, is a third-generation family business founded in 1985 by Khalil Hassan, a Lebanese immigrant who arrived in this country with $1,200 and a vision of connecting people across linguistic and cultural barriers. The board members exchanged glances. This wasn't the clinical financial analysis they'd expected. The company specializes in multilingual interface technology, James continued, and has developed some of the most sophisticated translation and communication software in the telecommunications industry. Their innovations have enabled millions of international communications that wouldn't otherwise be possible. All very touching, Blackwood said impatiently. What are the acquisition terms? James met his eyes steadily. The Hassan family is facing financial difficulties due to the economic downturn. Their major contracts have been cancelled or postponed, and they're struggling to meet operating expenses. Perfect, Margaret Chen said with satisfaction. "Distressed assets are always the best acquisitions. What's our offer?" The preliminary offer was 12.5 million for complete acquisition, James said. "And?" Blackwood prompted. James was quiet for a long moment, the weight of 12 expectant gazes pressing down on him like a physical force. In his jacket pocket, his father's photograph seemed to burn against his chest. "And I'm recommending we withdraw the offer." The silence that followed was so complete that James could hear the air conditioning humming in the walls. "I'm sorry," Margaret Chen said finally, her voice dangerously quiet. "Could you repeat that?" "I'm recommending Sterling Industries withdraw from the Hassan Electronics acquisition." The boardroom erupted. "Have you lost your mind?" Blackwood's voice rose above the chaos. "This is a $50 million opportunity." Margaret Chen slammed her hand on the table. "The shareholders will crucify us," shouted another voice. James raised his hand for silence, and gradually the room quieted. "Hassan Electronics represents everything Sterling Industries was originally founded to support," he said calmly. "Innovation in international communications, technology that breaks down cultural barriers, family businesses, building something meaningful." "Meaningful doesn't pay dividends," Blackwood growled. "Doesn't it?" James asked. "Our quarterly reports show we're profitable. But are we building anything lasting? Are we creating value or just extracting it?" Margaret Chen leaned forward, her expression calculating. "James, I understand that emotional considerations can cloud judgment, but this isn't emotional," James interrupted. "It's strategic. Hassan Electronics has developed technology that could revolutionize international business communications. Instead of acquiring them at a discount, we should be partnering with them, investing in their innovations, helping them expand. Partnership doesn't give us controlling interest," Blackwood pointed out. "Maybe controlling interest isn't what we need," James replied. "Maybe what we need is to remember why my father started this company in the first place." The board members looked around the table, confusion and frustration written across their faces. "Your father was a pragmatist," Blackwood said finally. "He understood that business is about profit, not charity." James reached into his jacket and pulled out the photograph, placing it on the table where everyone could see it. "My father at the groundbreaking for our first international telecommunications project," he said quietly. "He wrote on the back, 'Building bridges, one connection at a time.'" James looked around the table. "When did we stop building bridges and start burning them for fuel?" Margaret Chen studied the photograph, then looked back at James. "So, what exactly are you proposing?" James took a deep breath. "I'm proposing we offer Hassan Electronics a partnership. 25 million in development funding, shared technology resources, and collaborative research opportunities. They maintain controlling interest in their company, we gain access to their innovations, and together we develop the next generation of international communication technology." "That's 3 times our original acquisition budget," Blackwood said incredulously. "For potentially 10 times the long-term return," James replied, "and for something more valuable than profit margins." "Which is?" Margaret Chen asked skeptically. "A legacy worth leaving." The boardroom fell silent again, but this time the silence felt thoughtful rather than shocked. Finally, Richard Blackwood spoke. "James, you're asking us to trust your judgment on a very expensive gamble." "Yes, I am." "Based on what? A family dinner and a sentimental photograph?" James met his eyes steadily. "Based on the realization that the most profitable companies are built on innovation, not acquisition. Based on the understanding that sustainable success comes from creating value, not extracting it." He paused. "And based on the belief that my father would be ashamed of the man I've become if I don't at least try to honor what he built." Margaret Chen tapped her fingers on the table, a gesture James recognized as her thinking pose. The Hassan family would have to agree to the partnership terms. "They would," James confirmed. "And if they refuse?" James considered this. Then we respect their decision and withdraw from the acquisition entirely. Blackwood looked around the table. All in favor of James's partnership proposal? The vote was closer than James had expected. 7 in favor, 5 against, but it passed. Motion carried, Blackwood said formally. James, you have board approval to offer Hassan Electronics a partnership proposal, but I want quarterly reviews, and if this doesn't show results within 18 months... I understand, James said. As the board members filed out, discussing the unexpected turn of events in hushed voices, Margaret Chen lingered behind. That was either very brave or very stupid, she said quietly. Probably both, James admitted. What changed your mind, really? James looked at the photograph still lying on the conference table. I remembered who my father raised me to be. Margaret Chen studied his face for a moment, then nodded. I hope you're right about this, James, for all our sakes. After she left, James sat alone in the empty boardroom, staring out at the Manhattan skyline. His phone had been buzzing with messages, probably from Marcus, from department heads, from shareholders who'd already heard about the board meeting. He ignored them all. Instead, he pulled up Maya's contact and typed, "Partnership proposal approved. Would your family be available for a meeting this afternoon?" The response came back immediately. What kind of partnership? James smiled, typing back, "The kind that builds bridges instead of burning them. I'll call Uncle Khalil. Maya?" "Yes? Thank you. For what?" James looked at his father's photograph, then out at the city where millions of people were making decisions that would shape their futures and the futures of people they'd never meet, for helping me remember what matters. Maya stared at her phone, reading James's messages for the 3rd time, her heart hammering against her ribs like a caged bird trying to escape. Around her, the Columbia University Library buzzed with the quiet intensity of students cramming for finals, but Maya couldn't focus on her dissertation notes, a partnership proposal, not an acquisition, but a partnership. She called her uncle immediately. "Uncle Khalil, it's Maya. James Sterling wants to meet with the family this afternoon. He says the board approved a partnership proposal." The silence on the other end stretched so long that Maya thought the call might have dropped. "Uncle Kay, are you there?" "I'm here, Habibti." Khalil's voice was thick with emotion. "What kind of partnership?" "I don't know the details, but he specifically said it was about building bridges instead of burning them." Another long silence. "Tell Mr. Sterling we'll meet him at 4 o'clock, Khalil said finally, "at the Hassan Electronics office. If he wants a partnership, he should see what he's partnering with." Maya agreed and hung up, then immediately called the restaurant to see if she could skip her shift. The manager wasn't happy, but Maya promised to work a double on Sunday to make up for it. By 3:30, Maya was standing outside Hassan Electronics' modest offices in Queens, watching James Sterling's black sedan pull into the parking lot. He emerged wearing a different suit than usual, still expensive but somehow less armor-like, and carrying a leather briefcase that probably cost more than Maya's monthly rent. "Hi," he said simply when he reached her. "Hi," she replied, suddenly aware that they were about to cross another threshold, that whatever happened in the next few hours would change everything between them, between their families, between the careful balance of power and principle they'd been negotiating. "Are you nervous?" Maya asked as they walked toward the building. "Terrified," James admitted. "I just spent $25 million of other people's money on a gamble based entirely on Arabic coffee and family dinner." Maya laughed, despite herself. "When you put it like that, it does sound insane." "Completely insane," James agreed. "But also right. Does that make sense?" Maya looked at him, this man who'd gone from corporate shark to vulnerable human being in the span of a week, who'd risked his professional reputation on the belief that business could be about more than profit, and felt something dangerous and wonderful unfurling in her chest. "Yes," she said quietly. "It makes perfect sense." The Hassan Electronics office was exactly what Maya had expected James to find surprising. Cramped but efficient, with mismatched furniture and family photos scattered between technical manuals and engineering diagrams. Khalil, Layla, and Omar were waiting in the small conference room, their expressions carefully neutral. James shook hands with each family member, his corporate training evident but somehow warmer than it had been at the restaurant. "Thank you for meeting on such short notice," he said, settling into the offered chair. "I have a proposal I'd like you to consider." He opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder of documents. Sterling Industries would like to offer Hassan Electronics a development partnership, $25 million in funding over 3 years, shared technology resources, collaborative research opportunities, and joint marketing support for international expansion. The Hassan family exchanged glances. "What would Sterling Industries get in return?" Layla asked, her voice carefully controlled. "Access to your multilingual interface technology, collaboration on future innovations, and shared revenue from any jointly developed products." James paused. "Hassan Electronics would maintain controlling interest in the company and full autonomy over family operations." Khalil leaned forward, his eyes intense. "Why?" "Because what you've built here represents the future of international business communications," James replied, "and because partnership creates more value than acquisition." Omar couldn't contain his excitement any longer. "$25 million? For real?" "For real," James confirmed, sliding the contract across the table, pending legal review and final negotiations, of course. Layla picked up the contract, scanning it with her engineer's precision. "These terms are generous." "They're fair," James corrected. "Hassan Electronics has been undervalued by everyone, including myself." Khalil was quiet for a long moment, studying James's face with the careful attention of someone who'd survived decades of business negotiations. "What changed your mind, Mr. Sterling?" James glanced at Maya, then back at Khalil. "Your niece reminded me that my father didn't build Sterling Industries to extract value from other people's dreams. He built it to amplify them. And the board agreed to this? 7 votes in favor, 5 against." James smiled ruefully. "It was closer than I'd hoped, but democracy prevailed." Khalil extended his hand across the table. "Then we have a deal, pending the legal details." As the two patriarchs shook hands, Maya felt tears threatening again. Her family's company was safe. More than safe. It was about to flourish in ways they'd never imagined possible. "There's something else," James said, looking directly at Maya. "The partnership includes funding for a cultural liaison position, someone to help navigate the linguistic and cultural complexities of international expansion." Maya's breath caught. "What kind of position?" "Full-time, competitive salary, opportunities for research publication and conference presentations?" James's eyes were warm with something that looked like hope. "We'd want someone with advanced linguistics training and practical experience in cross-cultural business communications." "That sounds like a job description written specifically for Maya," Omar said with a grin. "It was," James admitted. Maya stared at him, overwhelmed by the implications. "A job that would use her actual expertise, eliminate her financial struggles, and allow her to work alongside the man who'd just saved her family's legacy. The same man who made her heart race every time he looked at her with those storm-grey eyes." Maya started, then stopped, unable to find words adequate to the moment. "Think about it," James said gently. "No pressure. But the offer stands." As the meeting wound down and the family began discussing legal reviews and timeline details, Maya found herself standing outside Hassan Electronics with James, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the parking lot. "Thank you," she said quietly. "Thank you," James replied. "None of this would have happened without you. I didn't do anything except serve you dinner and call out your assumptions." "You did everything," James said intensely. "You showed me who I used to be, who I could be again." Maya looked up at him, this man who'd turned his entire professional life upside down based on principle rather than profit, and felt the last of her defenses crumble. "James, I know," he said softly. The timing is complicated. The professional situation is complicated. Everything about this is complicated. But, Maya prompted. James stepped closer, close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his grey eyes, close enough to smell his cologne mixed with something that was purely him. But I haven't been able to stop thinking about you since that first night at the restaurant. About your intelligence, your passion, your integrity. He paused, searching her face. About the way you made me want to be better than I've been. Maya's heart was hammering so hard, she was sure he could hear it. James, this is crazy. A week ago you were trying to destroy my family's company. A week ago I didn't know what I was destroying, James replied. And I didn't know you. They stood there in the parking lot, suspended between possibility and impossibility, between the safe distance they'd maintained and the dangerous territory they were about to enter. If I take the job, Maya said carefully, we'd be working together. Yes, that could complicate things. Everything worthwhile is complicated, James said, echoing her uncle's earlier sentiment. Maya looked at him for a long moment. This man who'd proven that people could change, that principles could triumph over profit, that sometimes taking the biggest risk was the only way to find out what you were capable of becoming. Ask me again in a month, she said finally. Ask you what? Maya smiled, stepping back toward her car. Everything you want to ask, but are too professional to say right now. James watched her go, a slow smile spreading across his face. Maya? She turned back. I'm going to hold you to that. I'm counting on it, Maya replied, and drove away, leaving James standing in the parking lot, grinning like a man who'd just discovered that the best deals in life couldn't be quantified in quarterly reports. 3 weeks into her new position as cultural liaison for the Sterling Hassan partnership, Maya had learned several important things about working with James Sterling. First, he was even more brilliant than she'd initially suspected, with an intuitive understanding of international business dynamics that made their collaborative meetings feel like intellectual tennis matches. Second, he had a habit of bringing her coffee every morning. Not the basic office brew, but carefully sourced beans from different countries, each cup accompanied by a brief cultural lesson about its origins. Third, he was absolutely, completely, devastatingly attractive when he was passionate about a project, and Maya was spending approximately 60% of her workday trying not to stare at him during presentations. This was becoming a problem. Maya sat in her new office, a bright, modern space in Sterling Industries' Midtown headquarters that was roughly the size of her entire apartment, reviewing translation protocols for their upcoming expansion into Southeast Asian markets. The Hassan electronics technology was being integrated with Sterling's international communication platforms, and the preliminary results were better than anyone had dared hope. Her phone buzzed with a calendar reminder, 10 a.m. meeting with James to review the Bangkok proposal. Maya glanced at her reflection in her computer screen, smoothing her hair and wondering when exactly she'd started caring about her appearance for business meetings. A knock at her door interrupted her primping. Come in. James entered carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing the kind of smile that made Maya's professional resolve wobble dangerously. Ethiopian single origin, he said, setting 1 cup on her desk. The beans are processed using a traditional method that dates back to the 15th century. Maya accepted the coffee gratefully, inhaling the rich aroma. You know you don't have to bring me educational beverages every morning. I know, James replied, settling into the chair across from her desk. I enjoy it. The way he said it, casual but warm, made Maya's pulse accelerate in ways that were entirely inappropriate for a 10 a.m. business meeting. So, Maya said, focusing determinedly on the Bangkok proposal spread across her desk, I've reviewed the linguistic requirements for the Thai market expansion, but James wasn't looking at the documents. He was watching her face with the same intensity he brought to quarterly projections, and Maya found it increasingly difficult to concentrate on syntax structures and cultural adaptation protocols. James, she said finally, looking up to find him still staring. "Are you listening to anything I'm saying about localization strategies?" Every word," he replied, though his expression suggested otherwise. "You were explaining the tonal complexities of Thai business communications. That was 5 minutes ago. I've moved on to demographic analysis." James had the grace to look sheepish. "Sorry, I was distracted." "By what?" Maya asked, though part of her was afraid of the answer. James was quiet for a moment, and Maya recognized the expression on his face, the same careful consideration he'd shown before every major decision over the past 3 weeks. "By wondering how much longer we're going to pretend this is just business," he said quietly. Maya's breath caught. They'd been dancing around this conversation since she'd started working at Sterling Industries, maintaining professional boundaries while the air between them crackled with increasingly obvious attraction. "James, I know," he said quickly. "Professional relationship, complicated circumstances, potential HR nightmare. I've been giving myself the same lecture for 3 weeks. And it's not working." James leaned forward, his eyes intense. "Maya, I think about you constantly. When I'm in board meetings, when I'm reviewing contracts, when I'm supposedly sleeping at night. You're brilliant and funny and beautiful, and every day I work with you makes me more certain that what I'm feeling isn't going away." Maya stared at him, her heart hammering against her ribs. Everything she'd been trying not to acknowledge for 3 weeks was suddenly laid bare between them, impossible to ignore or rationalize away. "This is a terrible idea," she said finally. "Probably," James agreed. "It could complicate everything. The partnership, our working relationship, my family's trust in Sterling Industries." "It could," James acknowledged. "And if it doesn't work out, I could lose the best job I've ever had." "You could," James said softly. "Though for the record, your position here isn't contingent on anything personal between us." Maya looked at him for a long moment. This man who'd turned his life upside down, based on principles rather than profit, who brought her coffee every morning like offerings, who looked at her like she was the most fascinating thing in his carefully organized world. "Ask me," she said quietly. "Ask you what?" "What you wanted to ask me a month ago." James's expression grew serious, almost formal. "Maya Hassan, would you like to have dinner with me? Not as business associates, not as cultural liaisons, but as 2 people who are undeniably attracted to each other and tired of pretending otherwise." Maya felt a smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "That's quite a mouthful. I'm a thorough person. I've noticed." Maya pretended to consider his proposal, though they both knew what her answer would be. "Where did you have in mind? Somewhere we won't run into board members or family members or anyone else who might have opinions about our personal lives." "That sounds mysterious." "It's supposed to." James grinned, and Maya was struck again by how different he looked when he smiled. Younger, more open, less like a corporate executive, and more like the man who'd spent 2 years in Beirut, learning to see the world through different eyes. "All right," Maya said, trying to sound casual despite the fact that her pulse was racing. "But I have conditions." "Name them." "First, we keep this separate from work. No personal conversations during business hours, no preferential treatment, no compromising the partnership because of whatever this becomes." "Agreed," James said immediately. "Second, if this goes badly, we handle it like adults. No drama, no making things awkward for our colleagues, no letting personal issues affect professional responsibilities." "Agreed." "Third," Maya hesitated, then decided to be completely honest. "I've never dated anyone remotely like you. Rich, powerful, used to getting whatever he wants. If you're expecting some kind of trophy girlfriend who looks good at charity galas and doesn't have opinions about your business decisions." "Maya," James interrupted gently, "if I wanted a trophy girlfriend, I wouldn't have fallen for a woman who called me out in Arabic and then lectured me about insider trading." The word fallen hung between them like a confession. "Is that what this is?" Maya asked quietly. "You've fallen for me?" James met her eyes steadily. I think I fell for you the moment you responded to my arrogance with perfect linguistic precision and moral clarity. Maya felt her carefully constructed professional defenses crumble completely. James, but I don't want to pressure you, he continued quickly. If you're not ready, or if you think it's too complicated, pick me up at 7, Maya said, surprising herself with her decisiveness. James blinked. What? Tonight. Pick me up at 7. My address is in my personnel file. You're sure? Maya looked at him. This man who'd chosen principle over profit, who'd saved her family's company, who'd been patiently bringing her educational coffee for 3 weeks while respecting her request for professional distance, and felt something settle into place in her chest, something that felt like coming home. I'm sure, she said. James's smile was radiant. Should I dress up or dress down? Surprise me, Maya replied, then added with a grin. But maybe avoid anything that screams hostile corporate takeover. James laughed, standing to leave. I'll do my best. After he left, Maya sat in her office for several minutes, staring at the Bangkok proposal without seeing it. She'd just agreed to go on a date with James Sterling, her boss, the man who 3 weeks ago had been trying to acquire her family's company, the billionaire who probably had more money in his checking account than Maya would earn in her lifetime. This was either the best decision she'd ever made or the worst. Her phone rang, interrupting her spiral of second-guessing. Layla's name appeared on the screen. Hey, cousin, Maya answered, trying to sound casual. Hey yourself, how's the new job treating you? It's good, really good. The work is fascinating, and James, Mr. Sterling, is surprisingly easy to collaborate with. James, is it? Layla's tone was knowing. Interesting development. Maya could practically hear her cousin's grin through the phone. It's professional, Layla. Uh-huh. And how professional were you being when you spent 20 minutes yesterday explaining the cultural significance of Lebanese coffee service to a man who lived in Beirut for 2 years? Maya winced. She'd forgotten that Layla had been in that meeting. I was being thorough. You were being smitten, Layla corrected with amusement, which, for the record, appears to be mutual. The man looks at you like you're the most fascinating woman in the world. That's ridiculous, Maya. I have 3 engineering degrees and exceptional observational skills. James Sterling is completely gone for you. Maya felt heat creep up her neck. Even if that were true, it would be complicated. The best things usually are. Layla's tone grew more serious. But Maya, be careful. I like him. We all do, actually. But he's still James Sterling. He's used to getting what he wants, and his world is very different from ours. I know, Maya said quietly. Do you? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're falling pretty hard for a man whose idea of casual spending is our annual family income. Maya was quiet for a moment, absorbing the truth in her cousin's words. What if I am? Then I hope he deserves you, Layla said softly, and I hope you know what you're getting yourself into. After hanging up, Maya spent the rest of the day trying to focus on work while her mind kept drifting to the evening ahead. What did one wear to dinner with a billionaire? What did they even talk about outside of business? Did James expect her to know about wine and art and whatever else wealthy people discussed over expensive meals? By 6:30, Maya had changed clothes 3 times and was standing in front of her bathroom mirror, trying to tame her hair into something approaching sophistication. She'd finally settled on a simple black dress, elegant but not trying too hard, and minimal jewelry. The knock on her door came at exactly 7 o'clock, which somehow didn't surprise her. James Sterling struck her as the kind of man who was never late. Maya opened the door to find James standing in her hallway, wearing dark jeans, a button-down shirt, and a leather jacket that probably cost more than her monthly rent, but made him look approachably human rather than intimidatingly corporate. "Hi," he said, and Maya was gratified to see that he looked as nervous as she felt. "Hi," she replied, then paused, taking in his casual attire. "I thought we were going to dinner." "We are." James smiled mysteriously. "Just not the kind of dinner you're probably expecting." Should I be worried? Probably, James said, echoing their conversation from that morning. But I hope you'll trust me anyway. Maya looked at him for a moment. This man who'd proven that people could change, who'd risked his professional reputation on principle, who'd been patiently earning her trust for 3 weeks, and made her decision. Lead the way, Mr. Sterling. James, he corrected gently. Tonight, I'm just James. Ooh. Maya followed him downstairs to where his car was waiting, but instead of the imposing black sedan she'd expected, James was driving a modest grey Honda. This is not what I was expecting, Maya said as he opened the passenger door for her. Good, James replied. I was hoping to surprise you. As they drove through the city, Maya found herself relaxing despite her nerves. James was easy to talk to when he wasn't in corporate mode. Funny, thoughtful, genuinely interested in her opinions about everything from urban planning to international politics. Can I ask you something? Maya said as they stopped at a red light. Anything. Why the Honda? I was expecting something more executive. James grinned. This was my father's car. He bought it in 2005, drove it until the day he died. I couldn't bring myself to get rid of it. Maya looked around the car's modest interior with new understanding. You still drive it? Sometimes. When I want to remember who I used to be before Sterling Industries became my entire identity. The light turned green, and they continued through the city. Maya was trying to figure out their destination when James pulled into the parking lot of a small Lebanese restaurant in Brooklyn. Marouche? Maya read the sign, surprised. James, this is where my family has been coming for special occasions since I was 12. I know, James said, looking pleased with himself. I asked your uncle for a recommendation. Maya stared at him. You asked Uncle Khalil where to take me on a date? James suddenly looked uncertain. Was that inappropriate? I wanted to take you somewhere meaningful, not just some generic, expensive restaurant, but if you'd prefer... No. Maya interrupted, feeling her heart do something complicated in her chest. It's perfect. It's just, no one's ever asked my family for dating advice before. Well, James said, coming around to open her door, you're not just anyone. The restaurant was small and intimate, with worn wooden tables and family photos covering the walls. The owner, Mrs. Farah, recognized Maya immediately and embraced her warmly before leading them to a corner table. Your young man called ahead, she told Maya with a knowing smile, speaking in Arabic. He wanted to make sure we had your favorite dishes prepared. Maya looked at James in surprise. You called ahead. I wanted tonight to be special, James replied, looking almost shy. As they settled into their seats, Maya found herself seeing James in an entirely new light. This wasn't the intimidating corporate executive or even the conflicted businessman she'd been working with for 3 weeks. This was someone who'd taken the time to learn about her favorite restaurant, who'd asked her family for advice, who'd chosen his father's car over his executive sedan for their first date. This is nice, Maya said quietly. It is, James agreed, but he was looking at her rather than the restaurant. James... I know we said we'd keep work and personal separate, he interrupted, but I need you to know something. Maya felt her stomach flutter with nerves. What? The partnership with Hassan Electronics, the job offer, everything we've built professionally, none of it was about trying to get you to go out with me. James's expression was serious, almost formal. I need you to know that this isn't some elaborate corporate seduction. Maya studied his face, looking for deception or manipulation, and finding only sincerity and concern. I know, she said finally. Do you? Because I've been worried that you might think... James, Maya interrupted gently. I know. The partnership was the right decision for both companies. The job offer was based on my qualifications. And this, she gestured between them, this is something else entirely. James relaxed visibly. Good. I've never felt this way about anyone before, and I didn't want you to think it was all some calculated business strategy. Have you really never felt this way before? Maya asked, curious despite herself. James considered the question seriously. I've dated, obviously, but it was always transactional, I suppose. Social expectations, corporate networking, people who fit into my world without challenging it. He met her eyes. You challenge everything, Maya. The way I think, the way I see myself, the way I want to live my life. Is that good or bad? It's terrifying, James said honestly, and also the best thing that's happened to me in years. Their conversation was interrupted by Mrs. Farah arriving with a spread of Lebanese dishes that made Maya's mouth water. Kibbe, hummus, tabbouleh, lamb shawarma, and baklava for dessert. This is way too much food, Maya laughed. Mrs. Foudra wanted to make sure I made a good impression, James replied, attempting to serve himself hummus with the confidence of someone who'd clearly practiced. Maya watched him navigate the unfamiliar foods with determination and only occasional confusion, and felt something warm and dangerous settling in her chest. You know, she said as they shared the meal, most men would have taken me to some expensive steakhouse and tried to impress me with wine knowledge. I'm not most men, James replied simply. No, Maya agreed, studying his face in the soft restaurant lighting. You're not. As the evening progressed, Maya found herself falling deeper under James's spell. He listened when she talked, asked thoughtful questions, shared stories about his childhood and his relationship with his father that revealed depths she was only beginning to understand. Tell me about growing up in Detroit, James said over dessert. Maya considered where to start. Loud, she said finally, chaotic, full of people who cared more about family than money, who measured success by how well you treated your neighbors rather than how much you accumulated. That sounds wonderful. It was, but also limiting in some ways. There wasn't much room for individual ambition if it meant leaving the community behind. Maya took a bite of baklava. I think that's part of why I was so angry when you threatened to acquire Hassan Electronics. It wasn't just a business to us, it was the embodiment of everything my uncle had worked to build for our family. James nodded thoughtfully. I understand that now, but I didn't then. What was it like for you, growing up with money and expectations? James was quiet for a moment. Lonely, he said finally. I had everything I could want materially, but my parents were always working, always traveling, always focused on the next deal or acquisition. I learned early that love was conditional, based on performance, achievement, meeting expectations. Maya felt her heart contract with sympathy. That sounds exhausting. It was. Still is sometimes. James met her eyes. But being with you, I don't feel like I have to perform. I can just be myself. And who is that? Maya asked softly. James smiled, and Maya saw a glimpse of the man he might have been if he'd grown up in a house full of family dinners and unconditional love. I'm still figuring that out. As they walked back to his car after dinner, Maya found herself walking closer to James than professional distance would dictate. When he reached for her hand, she didn't pull away. Maya, James said as they reached the car, can I ask you something? Of course. Are you happy? With the job, with the partnership, with this? He gestured between them. Maya looked at him. This man who'd saved her family's company, who'd given her the career opportunity she'd dreamed of, who'd taken her to her favorite restaurant and asked her uncle for dating advice, and felt something click into place. Yes, she said simply. I'm happy. James smiled, and Maya realized she was about to be kissed for the first time in over a year. But instead of the confident, practiced kiss she might have expected from James Sterling, the billionaire, she got something tender and questioning, as if he was asking permission with every touch. When they broke apart, Maya was breathless. That was, she started, worth waiting for, James finished softly. Maya smiled up at him, feeling dizzy with possibility and attraction, and the terrifying realization that she was falling in love with James Sterling. Take me home, she said quietly. Are you sure? James asked, and Maya could see the conflict in his eyes, desire warring with respect, want tempered by genuine care for her feelings. I'm sure, Maya replied, and meant it. The drive back to her apartment was charged with anticipation and unspoken questions about what came next, about how two people from such different worlds could possibly make something work, about whether what they felt was strong enough to bridge the gap between corporate boardrooms and family dinner tables. But as James walked her to her door and kissed her goodnight with the kind of gentleness that made her knees weak, Maya decided that some questions could wait until tomorrow. Tonight, she was just a woman who'd had a perfect first date with a man who made her heart race, and her future look entirely different than she'd imagined. And that was enough. 2 weeks of secret dating had taught Maya several things about James Sterling that quarterly reports never could have revealed. He was adorably terrible at parallel parking. He owned exactly one pair of jeans, which he'd apparently bought specifically for their first date. He made scrambled eggs like a man conducting a symphony, with unnecessary precision and complete concentration. And he had absolutely no idea how to exist in her world without drawing attention. Maya discovered this last fact on a rainy Thursday evening when James showed up at her Columbia Linguistics Department mixer wearing a suit that probably cost more than most graduate students' annual stipends. "You said casual," James protested when Maya pulled him aside, noting how every head in the room had turned when he walked in. "Academic casual," Maya hissed, tugging at his silk tie, "not merger and acquisition casual. There's a difference?" Maya looked at him, this brilliant man who could navigate international business negotiations but was completely mystified by graduate student social dynamics, and felt her exasperation melt into fondness. "Next time, wear the jeans," she said, standing on her toes to kiss him quickly. "Next time?" James's eyes lit up. "Does that mean I haven't completely embarrassed you?" "The jury's still out," Maya replied, but she was smiling. Their moment was interrupted by Professor Martinez, Maya's dissertation advisor, approaching with the predatory look of someone who'd spotted an interesting research subject. "Maya, aren't you going to introduce me to your friend?" "Professor Martinez, this is James Sterling." "James, Professor Martinez supervises my dissertation research." Professor Martinez's eyebrows shot up. "Sterling? As in Sterling Industries?" James extended his hand politely. "Guilty as charged." "Fascinating," Professor Martinez said, shaking James's hand while studying him like a particularly intriguing linguistic phenomenon. "Maya's been doing groundbreaking work on how economic power dynamics affect cross-cultural business communications. I imagine you'd be an excellent case study." Maya felt heat creep up her neck. "Professor, actually, I'd be very interested in Maya's research," James said smoothly, "though I suspect I'm more cautionary tale than success story." Professor Martinez laughed appreciatively. "Modest and self-aware. Maya, you've found yourself an interesting specimen." After Professor Martinez moved on, James leaned close to Maya's ear. "Did he just call me a specimen?" "Welcome to academia," Maya replied. "Everyone's a research subject." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of introductions and barely concealed curiosity from Maya's colleagues. James handled it all with surprising grace, asking thoughtful questions about research projects and somehow managing to discuss international business without sounding condescending. "That wasn't so bad," Maya said as they walked to his car afterward. "Your friend Chen asked me if I'd ever considered the psychological impact of linguistic colonialism in corporate environments," James replied dryly. "What did you tell her?" "That I was beginning to." Maya stopped walking, studying his face in the streetlight. "Are you?" James considered the question seriously. "Among other things, yes." "What other things?" "Like whether it's possible for someone from my background to truly understand someone from yours. Like whether love is enough to bridge fundamental differences in worldview." James paused. "Like whether I'm falling in love with you because you challenge me or despite it." Maya's heart skipped at the casual use of the L word. "And what conclusions have you reached?" That I'm definitely falling in love with you," James said quietly, and that it's both because of and despite everything else. Maya felt her breath catch. They'd been dancing around deeper feelings for 2 weeks, but hearing James say the words out loud made everything suddenly real and terrifying and wonderful. "James, you don't have to say anything," James said quickly. "I know it's complicated, I know it's fast, I know there are a million reasons why this shouldn't work." "I love you too," Maya interrupted, surprising herself with her certainty. James went very still. "You do?" "I do." Maya stepped closer, reaching up to cup his face. "I love your terrible parallel parking and your overthinking and the way you make scrambled eggs like you're diffusing a bomb. I love that you asked my uncle for dating advice and that you drive your father's car when you want to remember who you used to be." James kissed her then, right there on the street corner outside her university, with the kind of desperate intensity that suggested he'd been holding back for weeks. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Maya realized they'd crossed another line. Love changed everything, the stakes, the risks, the potential for heartbreak if this all fell apart. "Now what?" she asked quietly. "Now we figure out how to make this work," James replied, though his expression suggested he wasn't entirely sure how. The answer came sooner than expected. Maya's phone buzzed with a text from Layla. "Family emergency. Can you come to Uncle Kay's house?" "Now." Maya's blood ran cold as she read the message. Family emergencies in the Hassan household were never minor. "I have to go," she told James, her voice tight with worry. "Family emergency." "I'll drive you," James said immediately. "You don't have to." "Maya," James's voice was firm, "I'm driving you." 20 minutes later, they pulled up to Khalil's house to find multiple cars in the driveway and lights blazing in every window. Maya's stomach clenched with dread as she hurried toward the front door, James close behind. Inside, the house was buzzing with tense conversation in Arabic and English. Khalil sat in his armchair, looking older than Maya had ever seen him, while Layla paced behind the couch, her face tight with anger. "Maya, thank God," Aunt Fatima said, immediately enveloping her in a hug. "We tried to call you, but—" "What happened?" Maya interrupted, scanning the room for signs of injury or crisis. "Richard Blackwood happened," Omar said grimly. Maya felt James go rigid beside her. "What about Richard Blackwood?" Khalil looked up, noticing James for the first time. His expression was carefully neutral. "Mr. Sterling, I wasn't expecting to see you tonight." "Uncle Kay? James drove me over when I got Layla's text," Maya explained quickly. "What's going on?" Layla stopped pacing, her eyes hard. "Blackwood contacted 3 of our major clients today, told them the Sterling-Hassan partnership was unstable, that they should consider alternative service providers." "What?" Maya felt the blood drain from her face. "Gets better," Omar added bitterly. "He also reached out to 2 of our key employees, offering them positions at competing firms with significant salary increases." Maya looked at James, whose face had gone white. "Did you know about this?" "No." James's voice was barely controlled. "Richard doesn't have the authority to—" "He has board influence," Khalil said quietly. "And apparently he's been questioning the partnership terms since the beginning." "Why?" Maya asked, though she was beginning to suspect the answer. "Because he thinks you compromised Sterling Industries' interests," Layla said bluntly, looking directly at James. "Because he believes you let personal feelings affect your business judgment." Maya felt like she'd been punched in the stomach. "Personal feelings. He knows about you too," Omar said, "or suspects strongly enough to act on it." "Okay." The room fell silent except for the ticking of Khalil's grandfather clock. Maya could feel everyone's eyes on her, waiting for explanations, accusations, or solutions she didn't have. "How much damage?" James asked finally, his voice professionally controlled, but his eyes showing his inner turmoil. 2 client contracts cancelled so far," Khalil replied. "1 key engineer gave notice this afternoon." "This is my fault," Maya said quietly. "Maya," James started. "No, it is." Maya turned to face her family, her voice growing stronger. "I knew dating James was risky. I knew people would question the partnership if they found out. I did it anyway because I was selfish. You weren't selfish, James said firmly. You were brave enough to take a chance on something real. Something real that's now threatening everything we've built, Layla pointed out, not unkindly, but not gently either. Khalil raised his hand for silence. The question isn't whose fault it is. The question is what we do now. I'll handle Richard, James said immediately. I'll call an emergency board meeting, make it clear that he overstepped his authority, and confirm his suspicions about your judgment being compromised. Layla interrupted. James, the fact that you're here tonight at our family crisis meeting proves his point. Maya saw the truth in her cousin's words reflected in James's expression, the terrible realization that his presence here, his obvious concern for the Hassan family, would only validate Blackwood's accusations. So what are you suggesting? Maya asked quietly. Layla exchanged a look with her father before answering. That you and James end the personal relationship, publicly and definitively. Do what? Maya's voice was sharp with shock. Make it clear that the partnership is purely professional, Omar added. Remove any ammunition Blackwood has to question James's motives. Maya stared at her family, feeling like the ground was shifting beneath her feet. You want me to break up with James to save the business? We want you to choose, Khalil said gently but firmly. Your personal happiness or your family's financial survival. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Maya looked around the room, at her uncle's tired eyes, at Layla's conflicted expression, at Omar's barely contained frustration, at Aunt Fatima's sympathetic but resolute face. Then she looked at James, who was staring at her with the expression of a man watching his world collapse. Maya, he said quietly, if ending things between us saves the partnership, then don't. Maya's voice was fierce. Don't you dare make this decision for me. But if I'm the problem, you're not the problem, Maya said, turning to face her family. Blackwood is the problem. Corporate politics are the problem. A system that assumes women can't make rational business decisions if they're emotionally involved is the problem. Maya, Khalil said carefully, I understand your feelings, but do you? Maya's voice rose. Because what I'm hearing is that 3 weeks of dating, someone has somehow negated my PhD in linguistics, my business expertise, and my ability to separate personal and professional interests. That's not what we're saying, Layla protested. Isn't it? You're asking me to end a relationship that makes me happy to prove that I can be trusted to do my job. Maya felt tears of frustration threatening. What kind of choice is that? The room fell silent again. Maya could hear her own heartbeat, could feel James's tension radiating from beside her, could sense her family's collective struggle between love and survival. Finally, James spoke. There might be another option. Everyone turned to look at him. I could step back from the partnership, remove myself from the day-to-day operations. Let Maya be the primary Sterling Industries liaison. That way, no. Maya's voice was flat. Absolutely not. Maya, no, James. I won't let you sabotage your own company to protect me from office gossip. It's not office gossip, Layla said quietly. Maya, 3 client contracts and a key employee. That's not gossip. That's our livelihood. Maya looked around the room one more time, at the faces of people she loved, at the man she'd fallen in love with, at the impossible choice that seemed to have no right answer. I need some air, she said finally, and walked out of the house. James found her sitting on the front steps 10 minutes later, staring up at the stars, barely visible through the city's light pollution. Hey, he said softly, settling beside her. Hey, Maya replied without looking at him. They sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of the evening pressing down on them like a physical force. What are you thinking? James asked finally. Maya was quiet for so long he thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I'm thinking that love shouldn't have to be this complicated, that falling for someone shouldn't threaten everything else you care about. She turned to look at him. I'm thinking that maybe Blackwood is right. Maybe I did let personal feelings compromise my professional judgment. Maya, did you know, she asked suddenly, when you offered me the job, when you pushed for the partnership, did you know you had feelings for me? James considered lying, then decided they'd had enough deception for one night. Yes. Maya closed her eyes. God, James. But that doesn't mean... It means everything, and you know it. Maya stood up abruptly. It means every business decision we've made together is suspect. It means Blackwood has every right to question the partnership terms. It means I've been exactly the kind of naive woman who can't separate her heart from her head. James stood too, reaching for her hands. That's not true. You're the most intelligent, capable person I know. The partnership succeeded because of your expertise, not because of our relationship. Can you prove that? Maya asked quietly. If Blackwood calls for a review, if he questions every decision, every recommendation I've made, can you prove that my feelings for you didn't influence my professional judgment? James was silent, and Maya had her answer. I have to choose, she said finally. My family or you, my career or my heart. Maya, there has to be another way. Is there? Maya's voice was tired. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like loving you was the most expensive mistake I've ever made. The words hit James like a physical blow. You don't mean that. Maya looked at him. This man she'd fallen in love with, who'd changed his entire worldview for her, who was now watching their relationship crumble under the weight of external expectations and impossible choices. I don't know what I mean anymore, she said honestly. James reached for her again, but Maya stepped back. I need time to think, she said. I need to figure out what matters most. What matters most is us, James said desperately. What we've built together personally and professionally. We can fight this, Maya. We can prove that our relationship doesn't compromise the partnership. Maya looked back toward the house, where her family was probably still discussing damage control and survival strategies. Can we? Or are we just fooling ourselves because we don't want to face the truth? What truth? Maya met his eyes, and James saw something breaking in her expression. That some distances are too far to bridge. That love isn't always enough. Done with that, she walked back into the house, leaving James standing alone on the front steps, wondering if he'd just lost the best thing that had ever happened to him, to the corporate world he'd spent his entire life building. 1 week of silence stretched between Maya and James, like an ocean neither knew how to cross. Maya threw herself into damage control, working 18-hour days to salvage client relationships while avoiding James's calls, texts, and the coffee that still appeared on her desk every morning despite everything. The Hassan Electronics team was slowly rebuilding trust, but the strain showed in Khalil's tired eyes and Layla's forced optimism. James, meanwhile, was waging his own war in Sterling Industries' boardroom. The Hassan partnership has lost us 3 major clients, Richard Blackwood declared during Friday's emergency board meeting. Your emotional compromise has cost this company millions. The clients will return once they see our Q4 results, James replied evenly. The Hassan technology integration is exceeding all projections. If there's a Q4 to report, Margaret Chen said pointedly. Richards raised legitimate concerns about conflict of interest. James looked around the table at faces that had once supported him. Are you questioning my professional judgment or my personal life? In this case, they appear inseparable, Blackwood said coldly. That afternoon, James made a decision that would either save everything or destroy it completely. Maya was reviewing translation protocols when Marcus appeared in her doorway, looking apologetic. Ms. Hassan, Mr. Sterling has called an all-hands meeting. He's requested your presence specifically. Maya's stomach dropped. What kind of meeting? Company-wide. Board members, department heads, key personnel. Marcus paused, including several Hassan Electronics representatives. Maya found herself in Sterling Industries' largest conference room 20 minutes later, surrounded by faces both familiar and hostile. Khalil, Layla, and Omar sat in the front row, their expressions carefully neutral. The Sterling Industries board flanked the room like a corporate firing squad. James stood at the podium, and Maya was struck by how exhausted he looked. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his usually perfect posture seemed weighted with something that looked like grief. "Thank you all for coming," James began, his voice carrying across the silent room. "I've called this meeting to address concerns about the Sterling Hassan partnership and my personal conduct as CEO. Maya felt her heart stop. He was going to end it. End them, end the partnership, end everything they'd built. Richard Blackwood has raised questions about whether personal relationships have compromised my professional judgment," James continued. "He's suggested that my feelings for Maya Hassan invalidated the partnership terms and created conflicts of interest." Murmurs rippled through the room. Maya wanted to disappear. "He's right," James said simply. The room went dead silent. "My feelings for Maya did affect my business decisions. They made me question acquisition strategies I'd never examined before. They forced me to consider human costs alongside profit margins. They reminded me that business is ultimately about people, not just numbers." James looked directly at Maya, and she saw something fierce and determined in his expression. "Maya Hassan is the most intelligent, principled person I've ever met. She speaks 7 languages, holds advanced degrees from 2 universities, and has expertise that Sterling Industries desperately needed. The partnership succeeded not despite our relationship, but because her integrity elevated both companies." Blackwood started to interrupt, but James held up his hand. "However, if the board believes my personal feelings compromise my professional judgment, then I'm prepared to resign as CEO, effective immediately." The room erupted. Maya heard Khalil's sharp intake of breath, saw Margaret Chen's shocked expression, felt her own world tilt on its axis. "James!" "No," Maya said, standing without thinking. James met her eyes across the room. "I won't let corporate politics destroy what we've built, Maya, either of us." "This is ridiculous," Blackwood sputtered. "You can't resign over a woman." "I'm not resigning over a woman," James said coolly. "I'm resigning over principle. Maya Hassan taught me that some things matter more than quarterly profits. If Sterling Industries can't support leadership that values innovation, partnership and human dignity alongside financial success, then it's not the company my father built." Maya felt tears threatening. This impossible, stubborn, wonderful man was about to sacrifice everything for her. "James," she said quietly, and the room fell silent to hear her. "What if there's another option?" All eyes turned to her. Maya took a shaky breath and stepped forward. "Mr. Blackwood, you're concerned about conflicts of interest, about whether personal relationships compromise professional judgment." Maya's voice grew stronger as she spoke. "I propose we settle this definitively." "How?" Blackwood asked suspiciously. Maya looked at James, then at her family, then at the room full of people whose livelihoods depended on decisions made in corporate boardrooms by men who'd never worked a day in food service. "Independent review," she said. "Hire outside auditors to examine every decision James and I made together, every contract, every recommendation, every strategic choice. If they find evidence that personal feelings compromised professional judgment, James resigns and I leave Sterling Industries." "And if they don't?" Margaret Chen asked. Maya lifted her chin. "Then Richard Blackwood resigns from the board for attempting to sabotage a successful partnership based on personal bias rather than business merit." The room fell silent again. Blackwood's face had gone red. "That's an expensive gamble, Ms. Hassan," he said finally. "I'm betting on excellence over prejudice," Maya replied. "James taught me that some risks are worth taking." James stared at her with an expression that made Maya's heart race despite everything. "All in favor?" he asked quietly. The vote was unanimous. 3 weeks later, Maya sat in her office reviewing the independent audit results for the 5th time. The findings were unequivocal. Every decision she and James had made together was professionally sound, strategically beneficial, and ethically unimpeachable. Richard Blackwood had resigned that morning. A soft knock interrupted her reading. James stood in her doorway, holding 2 cups of coffee and wearing his father's smile. "Ethiopian single origin," he said, settling into the chair across from her desk. "Fair trade, sustainably sourced, and absolutely free of corporate manipulation." Maya accepted the coffee gratefully. "We won." "We won," James agreed. They sat in comfortable silence, sipping coffee and watching Manhattan wake up outside her window. "Maya," James said finally, "I owe you an apology." "For what?" "For making you choose between love and family. For not fighting harder when Blackwood attacked the partnership. For almost giving up on us." Maya set down her cup and looked at him. This man who'd been willing to sacrifice his career for her, who'd learned to make scrambled eggs with unnecessary precision, who still drove his father's Honda when he wanted to remember who he used to be. "James?" "Yes?" "Ask me again." James's expression grew confused. "Ask you what?" Maya smiled, feeling lighter than she had in weeks. "What you wanted to ask me 2 months ago." Understanding dawned in James's eyes. He stood slowly, came around her desk, and took her hands in his. "Maya Hassan," he said solemnly, "would you like to have dinner with me tonight? Not as business associates, not as cultural liaisons, but as 2 people who are completely, irrevocably in love with each other and tired of pretending otherwise." "Yes," Maya said, standing to kiss him, "but I have conditions." "Name them," James murmured against her lips. "First, we're going to Marouche again, because Mrs. Farah has been asking about you." "Agreed." "Second, you're wearing the jeans." "Agreed." "Third," Maya said, pulling back to look into his storm-grey eyes, "you're going to ask my uncle's permission before you propose." James went very still. "Propose?" Maya grinned, feeling brave and reckless and absolutely certain. "You heard me, Sterling. I've seen your long-term strategic planning. Don't pretend you haven't thought about it." James kissed her then, right there in her Sterling Industries office, with the kind of desperate joy that suggested he'd been holding his breath for weeks. When they broke apart, both laughing, James rested his forehead against hers. "I love you, Maya Hassan. I love you too, James Sterling, even if you are too rich for your own good." "Hal tatazawajinani?" James asked softly in Arabic. "Will you marry me?" Maya's breath caught. "That's not fair. You know I can't resist your pronunciation." "Is that a yes?" Oj. Maya looked at this man, who'd learned to value partnership over acquisition, who'd chosen principle over profit, who'd been willing to give up everything for love, and realized that sometimes the best bridges were built not across differences, but because of them. "Naam," she whispered. "Yes." And as James spun her around her office, both of them laughing like teenagers, Maya thought about how wrong she'd been that first night at the restaurant. Some people were worth the risk of everything. 1 year later, the wedding reception was held at Marouche, which Mrs. Farah had closed to the public for the evening. Lebanese and American traditions mixed seamlessly. Maya wore her grandmother's gold jewelry with a designer dress. James's groomsmen included both his Harvard roommates and Omar, and the cake was baklava stacked in elegant tiers. "I still can't believe you married a billionaire," Layla said, appearing beside Maya with champagne and a satisfied grin. "I married James," Maya corrected, watching her husband attempt to dance to Lebanese music while her uncles shouted encouragement. "The billions are just a bonus." "A very nice bonus," Layla laughed. "Did you know he's funding full scholarships for 20 linguistic students at Columbia?" Maya turned to stare at her cousin. "He's what?" "The James and Maya Sterling Foundation for Cross-Cultural Communication," Layla explained. "Launched this morning. Didn't he tell you?" Maya looked across the room at James, who was now being taught traditional dance steps by Aunt Fatima, his face bright with laughter and concentration. "That sneaky, wonderful man," Maya murmured. "He's good for you," Khalil said, joining his daughter and niece. "You're both better together than apart." Maya hugged her uncle, thinking about all the bridges they'd built, between families, between cultures, between two people who'd learned that love was indeed a foreign language, but one worth becoming fluent in. Ya Habibati, James called across the room in Arabic, my love, come dance with your husband. Maya crossed the room to take his outstretched hand, and as they moved together to music that mixed East and West, tradition and innovation, she realized they'd found their rhythm at last. Sometimes the most beautiful stories began with the worst first impressions. Sometimes love really was enough.